Everyone knew that I was Ethan Blake's first love, the one he had pursued relentlessly for 2 years before finally marrying. But after we got married, he brazenly let his mistress move into our home and together with his mother, beat me until I lost the baby and died. After being reborn, seeing the mistress's belly gradually grow, I smiled. Finally, I could set my plan in motion. Wife, the Alexander West project is about to be finalized. Tonight, come with me to the dinner and witness it, Ethan Blake said, crouching slightly in front of me, holding my hands. Alexander West, I repeated the name, lost in thought for a moment before it hit me. I had been reborn. Judging by the situation, I was back before my pregnancy. Looking at Ethan Blake now, I noticed a gleam of unstoppable ambition in his eyes. I once thought that look meant trust in our relationship and confidence in his abilities. Who would have thought it was the gleam of a secret thrill he couldn't contain? Sure, I said calmly. Since heaven had given me this second chance, I would naturally rewrite the ending. Ethan Blake kissed my hands gently. I'll head to work first. I'll pick you up tonight. I smiled faintly and nodded. After seeing him off, I quickly went to the bathroom to wash my hands. Inside, memories came flooding back. I first met Ethan Blake at my father's company. At that time, I had just finished a painting I was proud of and couldn't wait to share it with my dad. When I arrived at the company, my dad was in a meeting, so I waited in the office. That's when Ethan Blake walked in. Is Mr. Sue in? He asked, pausing when he saw me. My dad is in a meeting, I replied, glancing at him. I couldn't help but notice how handsome he was. The painting is beautiful, he exclaimed. I hadn't expected him to strike up a conversation, and to my surprise, we clicked instantly. He introduced himself as Ethan Blake, new at my dad's company. He told me he loved painting too, but his family couldn't afford art school. Still, it hadn't dimmed his passion. From that day on, I found myself visiting my father's office more and more often. 8 out of 10 times, I could meet Ethan Blake and talk about art. My dad noticed our connection. He didn't object, in fact, he thought it was good for us to get to know each other. In his eyes, Ethan Blake was young but capable, meticulous, and reliable. Give him time and he would grow into a strong professional. I was my father's only daughter, and if Ethan Blake and I ended up together, my dad could entrust the company to him and have peace of mind. Ethan Blake courted me for 2 full years. Rain or shine, he delivered breakfast to me, accompanied me to art exhibitions on weekends, and took me out whenever I lost inspiration, saying relaxation sparked creativity. Every holiday came with flowers and gifts, along with little surprises, romantic and thoughtful. But after we married, he changed. He said marriage wasn't just about romance, but also about the mundane daily chores. He stopped waking early to buy me breakfast, eating only what I prepared for him. He stopped giving me flowers or gifts. Weekends he claimed to be too busy for art exhibitions, leaving me to go alone. Soon, he invited his parents to live in the house my dad bought for us. His father always tried to enter the master bedroom while I showered, claiming the outside toilet was occupied. His mother would yell for Ethan Blake to help her scrub her back, saying she didn't mean to call her husband but only because his father was old and weak. When I became pregnant, his mother insisted that Ethan Blake's cousin, Claire Donovan, come to care for me. I assumed she was concerned for the baby, so I didn't refuse. But one day, I accidentally saw my husband secretly kissing Claire in the kitchen. When I confronted them, they claimed I had imagined it due to the angle. I didn't believe them and slapped Claire. Ethan Blake immediately flew into a rage, shoving me to the ground as if he were about to hit me. Hearing the commotion, his mother came out. I expected her to intervene for the sake of the baby, but instead, she joined him in the assault. Die, you wretched woman! How dare you cheat on my son, carrying another man's child, yet expect me to care for you? I couldn't understand her words. My mind went blank, and I forgot to even resist. Ethan Blake looked at me, stunned, and smirked. The child in your womb belongs to Alexander West. I personally sent you to his bed. Then he kicked my belly. You really think I love you? look at yourself. Apart from having a rich father, what else can you do? You only know painting. What good is that? You're not even worthy of bearing my child. I couldn't believe these words were coming from the man who had once loved me so deeply. Back then, we had even talked about having 2 children, a boy and a girl. Ethan Blake had said, holding me gently, giving birth is so painful. I hope our first is a set of twins, then you only suffer once. The pain in my body finally made me realize what was happening. I wanted to fight back. But I was alone, how could I possibly stand against 3 of them? I felt blood flowing down below, my breathing growing faint, and soon I lost consciousness. That's how they beat me until I lost the baby and died. Shaking my head to dispel the memories, I hurriedly pumped several doses of hand sanitizer, finally feeling a little cleaner. A plan began to take shape in my mind. When I came out of the bathroom, I saw my father-in-law and mother-in-law getting ready to leave. I knew they were going to pick up Claire Donovan. In my previous life, Claire had arrived in Hang Chang at exactly this time, renting a place in the neighborhood next door. Later, after I became pregnant, my mother-in-law used the pretext of meeting someone to take care of me and arranged for Claire to move into our house. Coming back to the present, I volunteered to go with them to pick up my cousin. My father-in-law was more than happy, his eyes lingering on me a little too much. My mother-in-law couldn't think of a good reason to refuse, so she let me come along. Ethan Blake had taken the car when he left, so I had to take a taxi with my in-laws to the high-speed rail station. My father-in-law opened the back door but didn't get in, standing there with a pleased gesture. How enviable their relationship is, I muttered under my breath, quickly stepping aside to let my mother-in-law in, and then I slid into the front passenger seat myself. From the rearview mirror, I saw my mother-in-law glare at my father-in-law before settling in, and he followed in with a sullen face. I couldn't help but smirk inwardly, you old pervert. At the station, several men were surrounding Claire Donovan, helping with her luggage. My mother-in-law's face darkened, but my father-in-law's eyes lit up. I had to admit, Claire Donovan's figure was stunning, and her tight dress made her curves even more pronounced. Antidote, Claire called out, waving goodbye to the men and hurrying over with her bags. My father-in-law stepped forward in a gentlemanly manner, helping her with the luggage. What are you wearing like that for? My mother-in-law hissed. Mom, you don't get it. Nowadays it's all about freedom of fashion, I said, speaking up for Claire. Hello, cousin. I'm Ava Sinclair, Ethan Blake's wife. Only then did Claire look at me, her lips curling into a distant, polite smile. Hello. I didn't care for the subtle tension. I waved down a taxi and, as usual, jumped into the front passenger seat first, leaving them to squeeze into the back. Once home, I took charge and insisted that Claire stay in the house. My father-in-law praised me for being sensible, my mother-in-law said I at least understood social etiquette, while Claire discreetly surveyed the house. Then I suggested that she join Ethan Blake and me for dinner that evening, framing it as a welcome meal for her. My mother-in-law insisted on coming along, and I thought, why not? Let her. That evening, I took a taxi again, bringing the whole family to the hotel. Ethan Blake and Alexander West were already in the private room when I pushed the door open. Husband, I greeted lightly. Ethan immediately stood, introducing me to Alexander West. Hello, Miss Sinclair of the Sinclair Group, Alexander West said, stepping forward to shake my hand. I'm Alexander West, I've met your father before. I didn't extend my hand, just smiled politely. Alexander West. Nice to meet you. Then I stepped aside, letting Claire Donovan and my in-laws enter the room. Seeing them, both Ethan Blake and Alexander West's expressions shifted subtly, though their gazes were locked on Claire Donovan. Why are you here? Ethan Blake's tone was tense. It's your big day. Mom, Dad, and my cousin wanted to witness it. You don't mind, right? I asked sweetly. No, Ethan muttered, unable to argue in front of Alexander West. Alexander West quickly realized the situation. Since they're Miss Ava's family, please, have a seat. My in-laws, a bit embarrassed, quickly took their places next to Ethan Blake. I pulled Claire Donovan to the seat beside Alexander West, noticing the slight narrowing of his small eyes as his sick face tensed. The atmosphere at the table grew a little awkward. I suggested ordering some wine. Ethan Blake agreed enthusiastically, about to get up and fetch it himself. I was faster. I'll get it. You stay and entertain Alexander West, I said smoothly. Ethan's eyes flaked to Alexander West, glued to Claire Donovan, his expression darkening. I went out, grabbed the wine, and personally brought it in, placing the bottle I had earlier prepared at my seat. As expected, Ethan's eyes gleamed with anticipation. Little did he know, I had already swapped the wine. The original wine was now in another bottle, placed in front of him and Claire Donovan. Claire picked it up and began toasting Alexander West repeatedly. Alexander West, warmed by the wine, called his assistant to prepare the contract to be delivered to the Sinclair Group tomorrow. A weight lifted off my chest. Ethan Blake visibly relaxed and even shot Claire a grateful glance, thanking her for her help. Seeing their son land a major deal, my in-laws were pleased, no longer reserved. They raised their glasses, following Claire Donovan's lead to toast Alexander West, who graciously accepted. The dinner reached its peak atmosphere. I feigned cheerfulness, lifting my glass. Alexander West, I'll drink to you, thanking you for taking care of my husband. Miss Ava, you're too kind. This project's all thanks to Ethan Blake. If it succeeds, everyone benefits, Alexander West said, raising his glass toward me. I smiled and downed the wine in one gulp. You're refreshingly straightforward, Miss Ava, Alexander West commented, following suit and finishing his drink in one go. Ethan Blake's smile deepened as he watched our interaction. I refilled my glass, looking at Ethan Blake with a playful gleam. Honey, congratulations, may all your wishes come true. The words carried more meaning than I let on. Thank you, my wife, Ethan Blake said, his eyes flickering with a hint of cunning. A tiny thought crossed my mind, if this time he hadn't sent me to Alexander West, maybe we could have parted on good terms. But just as I set my glass down, Ethan Blake raised his cup again, proposing a toast. First he toasted to my care for him, I drank. Then he toasted to my father's guidance and support, I drank. Third, he toasted to my presence witnessing his success, I drank. True to his pattern from my previous life, he made the same choices again. I quickly reached my limit and collapsed onto the table, casting a glance at Ethan Blake before doing so. He was slightly drunk too, his face flushed, eyes reddened, perhaps from excitement at seeing me collapse or from his spiked wine. Not long after, Claire Donovan slumped over, followed by Ethan Blake. They had both been drinking the spiked wine rapidly, propped up only by the adrenaline of a major deal. Now that the project was secured, their guard finally lowered. My in-laws too, were completely drunk. When I opened my eyes, only Alexander West remained relatively sober, his small, shrewd eyes fixed on Claire Donovan. I called a waiter and told Alexander West that Ethan Blake had already opened a room upstairs. I asked him to go rest and keep an eye on Claire Donovan. Alexander West's eyes lit up instantly. Despite being tipsy, he tried to carry Claire upstairs himself, refusing the waiter's help. I booked a presidential suite next door, instructing the staff to bring Ethan Blake and my in-laws up. Once inside Ethan's room, I unlocked his phone with his fingerprint. Scrolling through his messages, nothing unusual appeared. Even his chats with Alexander West contained only a few lines of business-related talk. How then, had they reached an agreement? Checking his call records, I saw it had been handled over the phone. Realizing this, I quickly turned on a recorder. Though Ethan had sealed the deal with Alexander West, there was still mutual caution. He had recorded all their calls. The recordings were too many to listen to immediately, so I transferred them to my own phone, erased the traces, and returned the device. Looking out at the moon, I knew time was short. I had to move quickly. I grabbed the car keys, went to the underground parking, picked up my cousin and circled the lot several times before locating Ethan Blake's car. I hid a tiny camera inside and had my cousin drive me back home, where we installed cameras in every room. Once everything was set, I hurried back to the hotel. Together with my cousin, I went to Alexander West's suite. Seeing the messy room stirred a rush of satisfaction in me. In my last life, Ethan Blake had sent me to Alexander West's bed. This time, I would send his mistress. The cuckold RY would be of my own making. I snapped dozens of photos from every angle, even subtly arranging them into more intimate poses before pressing the shutter. I called my cousin to carry Claire Donovan to the adjacent presidential suite, tossing her onto Ethan Blake's bed for more photos. Afterwards, I sent my cousin downstairs. Sis, why don't you just divorce him? I have a lawyer friend who could make Ethan Blake leave empty-handed. Simply stripping him of assets is too lenient. Don't worry, I know my limits, I reassured him. If you need anything, call me. I'll be there immediately. My cousin's worried gaze lingered on me. Indeed, I would need his help. I went upstairs to another empty room to rest. Tomorrow held another act to play. The first to wake were my in-laws. Older people need little sleep. They checked each room, seeing only me in one. My mother-in-law went to another. My father-in-law hesitated at the door, but my mother-in-law twisted his ear and guided him along. They eventually reached a room with Ethan Blake and Claire Donovan. Upon opening the door, my mother-in-law jumped back, startled, and had my father-in-law close it. Soon, Ethan Blake and Claire Donovan appeared in the living room. Ethan Blake came to my room. I feigned just waking, making him jump slightly. Wife, did you sleep well last night? He asked, his gaze sharp. I'm fine, just drank too much, I said, feigning guilt. Ethan Blake relaxed, convinced something had happened between Alexander West and me. He said no more, letting my in-laws return home to rest while he went to the office. I didn't go home either, I went to the office as well. Avoiding Ethan Blake, I slipped into my father's office and intercepted him just as he was about to attend a meeting. I told him I wanted to take over the family company. He looked puzzled. Ethan Blake is doing so well in the company, he said. He just landed the Alexander West project today. Isn't it better if you stay home and focus on your painting? I knew that without a solid reason he might still let me join the company. But I needed him to be cautious of Ethan Blake and Alexander West. I recounted my previous life's experiences as if they had been a dream, and handed him the phone recordings I had transferred from Ethan Blake last night. The recordings detailed exactly how Ethan Blake and Alexander West had schemed to marginalize my father's authority in the company and divert its assets. Although my father didn't believe in dreams or premonitions, the call recordings were real and he couldn't help but give some credence to the warnings I had shared. In my last life, after I died, my father had handed the company entirely over to Ethan Blake. By the time he realized what had happened, the company was an empty shell. The shock had driven him to suicide. This time, I would never allow that to happen. My father accompanied me to the meeting room. Ethan Blake froze for a moment when he saw me, then quickly plastered a smile on his face. Honey, what are you doing here? We're about to start the meeting, we can talk at home if you like. He probably thought I had come to confront him about last night, but nothing had happened. My father spoke up, Ava is here to observe the meeting. Ethan Blake's expression darkened slightly, but he still put on the obedient husband act. Then sit next to me, honey. I'll explain anything you don't understand. No, I'll sit with my father. That seat is better, I said, heading straight for the central seat at the front. My father pulled an extra chair for me. After the meeting, he announced my appointment as general manager of the company, asking everyone to offer their support. A few familiar uncles and senior colleagues congratulated me and offered help if I had any questions. I smiled and nodded while stealing glances at Ethan Blake, whose face was ashen. The position that should have gone to him after landing the Alexander West project had now been intercepted by me, someone he despised as ignorant. He must have felt humiliated, yet he had no choice but to tolerate it. After all, the company belonged to my father, and I was still his legal wife. Ethan Blake quickly composed himself and approached me. Honey, what a surprise, why didn't you tell me? It was a sudden decision. Ava just found out too, my father explained. He clasped both our hands dramatically. From now on, this company relies on the two of you. I'm old enough to retire. You're still young, Dad. The company needs your leadership, Ethan Blake said with a sycophantic smile. My father chuckled. All right, go on with your work. I'll show Ava around the company. He led me to the general manager's private office. I'll investigate the matters you mentioned, my father said. You can continue painting here while you come to work. Dad, I really want to take over the company, I said seriously, looking him in the eyes. After I divorce Ethan Blake, I don't plan to find anyone else. Someone needs to inherit the company you've worked so hard to build. But if you don't marry, there's still no one to inherit the company, my father muttered. Huh. I plan to hand it over to my cousin, I replied. He looked at me intently. You've already thought this through. Then go for it. After work that evening, Ethan Blake came to pick me up. I didn't want to go home, the house was too disgusting, and I still needed space for Claire Donovan to play her part. I made an excuse, saying I had a lot of materials to review and would stay at my father's to learn more about the company. Honey, it's your family business. There's plenty of time. You don't need to rush, Ethan Blake said. I just don't want to fall too far behind you, I replied, feigning grievance. Seeing me act this way, he tried to wrap his arm around me, but accidentally kicked a box at my feet. Noticing the paints and brushes inside, his expression softened. He probably thought I had temporarily decided to get involved and would eventually lose interest. All right, but don't stay too late. Remember to rest, he said, leaving after a few more reminders. Little did he know the paint set had been deliberately placed to deceive him. When I returned to my father's house that night, I checked the surveillance. Since I wasn't coming home, Claire Donovan moved directly into my and Ethan Blake's room. I saved the footage and focused on work. Previously, I had asked my cousin to help me find a suitable location for an art gallery. He had sent me some preliminary information that I needed to review before visiting the site tomorrow. For several days, I avoided the office entirely, spending time with my cousin inspecting potential locations. Every day, Ethan Blake came to my office, only to find me absent. He messaged me, asking where I was. I casually sent selfies of myself drinking and dining out to cover my tracks. He quickly replied, have fun, and don't forget sunscreen. He probably figured I was just having a fleeting moment of enthusiasm about taking over the company. He didn't mention anything about coming home, either. It seemed he was enjoying himself immensely with Claire Donovan. I'd been too busy these past few days to check the surveillance. After nearly a week of scouting locations, I finally settled on a spot for the art gallery and returned to the company to start designing the layout. Seeing me show up, Ethan Blake came over, tired from all the fun. Sit down and take a break. In front of so many employees, he made it seem as if I, the new general manager, was out playing all day. It both built his image as a caring husband and subtly told everyone that I was merely a figurehead. Quite the clever move. I deliberately panted a little, it was worth it. The location for the gallery is perfect, and it took me 3 days of negotiating to get the rent down. Enough chatter, I need to start drawing the design, I said, intentionally brushing it off. Ethan Blake froze. Wait, what gallery? You didn't know? I pretended to be puzzled. Then, feigning a sudden realization, I added, I guess you've been too busy to notice. The company just set up a new department, and I'm leading the establishment of an art gallery. Ethan Blake's jaw dropped. He had assumed I was out enjoying myself, not actually working. At that moment, my cousin, disguised as a regular employee, came over with a document. General Manager, this requires your signature. I took the document seriously. It was an expense approval from Ethan Blake's department. The amount was far beyond the company's allowable limit. I suspected that in the past, he had used this loophole to siphon money from the company. Ethan Blake noticed it too, so I gestured for him to follow me to the office. I won't approve this. It exceeds the company's regulations, I said firmly. But this is for the Alexander West project. Everyone worked hard, and I just took them out for some relaxation. Ethan Blake tried to reason, clearly not expecting me to refuse. Honey, you know I just became general manager. I can't afford any mistakes, I said, my tone measured but firm. I softened slightly. Why don't you submit a corrected expense report within the approved amount, and I'll approve it. We can ask Dad to compensate you with a bonus for the project later. He reluctantly nodded. All right, I'll redo the approval. I sent him off with a few more encouraging words. After all, the Alexander West project couldn't afford a single misstep. Sure enough, it didn't take long before trouble hit the Alexander West project. Alexander West's company was reported for tax evasion, forcing him to drain all cash flow to pay fines. It still wasn't enough, and he even turned his attention to Ethan Blake, threatening to expose that night's affair if he didn't pay up. Ethan Blake had no choice but to transfer part of the funds he had quietly moved from the company over the years to Alexander West, but the project with our company stalled. Alexander West simply couldn't pay the final installment. All our company's upfront investment went down the drain. The executives criticized Ethan Blake, even considering firing him. Originally, the company hadn't planned to take on the Alexander West project. It was Ethan Blake who had spent pages in a PowerPoint outlining the potential benefits. Although the initial investment was large, the risk was worth the reward. The higher-ups agreed to take on the project because he was the son-in-law. They never expected it to collapse so quickly. My father had to step in, personally vouching for Ethan Blake. He instructed him to cover the deficit of $3 million to stabilize the situation. Then he told Ethan Blake to contribute whatever he could, showing initiative to maintain his position in the company. Ethan Blake reluctantly put in the remaining funds, about $1.5 million. My father, surprised at how much he had, simply accepted his explanation that it was stock market earnings, without further questioning. The funds were transferred to another company account. There was still a deficit of $1.5 million, so Ethan Blake came to me for the money. I said nothing, simply transferring $500,000 from my personal account. Honey, I only have $500,000. You know I've only just started working, I said. Can we borrow the rest from Dad first? He asked. The total investment in this project far exceeds $3 million, I said calmly. The reason we only asked you for $3 million is that Dad has already covered the bulk privately. He didn't cover it all so you would learn a lesson and turn the pressure into motivation. I spoke with such sincerity that even I almost believed it. Ethan Blake frowned, dissatisfied with my answer. The nerve of this man. His face darkened. Honey, you still have money somewhere, don't you? Do I have to kneel and beg? I really have no more. Try rounding up from your parents, or maybe borrow from your cousin, I said, showing him the balances in all my accounts. Of course, the money had already been moved. I'd been waiting for this day. The tax evasion by Alexander West's company had also been uncovered through my investigation and reported intentionally. This was all to retrieve the money Ethan Blake had funneled out and to remove him from the company. As Ethan Blake stared at my balances, his disdain deepened. In the end, I'm still an outsider. Your father won't bail me out, he muttered bitterly. Ethan Blake sneered. The entire company belongs to him, yet he insists I pay him back. Truly, a dog-biting Eldon been unable to recognize a good deed. My father and I hadn't covered the full amount, and yet he completely ignored all our efforts. I honestly couldn't understand why I ever tolerated such an ungrateful man. I decided not to pretend anymore. I had originally planned to squeeze even more money out of him, but that seemed impossible now. I took out the divorce agreement I had long prepared. Since you look down on my family so much, sign this, I said. Ethan Blake picked up the document, scanning it. You want me to walk away with nothing? Dream on. He even tried to lunge at me. The seed of violence had clearly taken root in his heart. Luckily, my cousin had been stationed by the door. He immediately rushed in and restrained Ethan Blake. What do you think you're doing? My cousin barked, twisting Ethan Blake's arm and pinning him to the table. Ethan Blake glanced at him, then turned back to yell at me. I knew something was off between you two that day. You're divorcing me just to be with that pretty boy, aren't you? You even prepared the divorce papers. Unbelievable. I'll tell you what, if you want a divorce, you walk away with nothing. Plus, you cheated, so you owe me compensation for emotional distress. I fired back, completely unbothered. Oh? And do you have proof? He snapped. Ethan Blake broke free from my cousin's grip and started rummaging through his phone. He opened the photo album, zooming in on a picture of me and Alexander West lying on the same bed. Want proof? Here, you bitch, he snarled. I calmly countered, what a coincidence, I have that photo too. I nonchalantly opened the original photos on my phone, Alexander West and Claire Donovan on the same bed, and showed them to him one by one. Ethan Blake's eyes turned red as he scrolled through, likely never expecting this. He had bribed someone at the hotel to photograph Alexander West's suite, but that person had been intercepted by me. I paid him extra to send Ethan Blake a few doctored photos. Ethan Blake had fallen for it completely, convinced that something had happened between Alexander West and me. He reached for my phone, but of course, he didn't get it. My cousin delivered a swift kick to Ethan Blake's stomach, sending him sprawling to the floor. When he got up, he no longer said a word, his face dark and stormy, and stormed out in a fit of rage. By the time he got home, Claire Donovan was probably in for a beating. I regretted not being there to watch the show live. It would have been glorious. I estimated when Ethan Blake would arrive, then quickly accessed the surveillance cameras at home. My cousin and I sat munching sunflower seeds, watching the drama unfold. Sure enough, Ethan Blake arrived and immediately slapped Claire Donovan. He had put himself in that situation, yet he blamed the woman. Hearing the commotion, my mother-in-law rushed out from the kitchen to stop him. What are you doing? Claire Donovan is pregnant. There's your child in her belly, she scolded, standing protectively in front of her. My father-in-law stepped in, slapping Ethan Blake on the back of the head. What do you think you're doing, you punk? Ethan Blake sneered, pregnant? 2 months along, right? That kid's probably Alexander West's bastard. Both my in-laws froze. Claire Donovan cried as she went to retrieve a medical report. The report clearly showed she was just over a month along. Ethan Blake froze. 1 month meant it couldn't be from that night. Realizing he had been tricked, he muttered, damn it. He clutched Claire Donovan and started fumbling explanations. Meanwhile, I checked the surveillance from over a month ago and saw my father-in-law enter Claire Donovan's room. I quickly pulled up the footage to confirm the child might not even be Ethan Blake's. With the art gallery's design plans completed, I moved on to hiring a professional renovation team. These past days, I had been running back and forth between the renovation company and the gallery site. The divorce matter was left to my cousin's lawyer friend. Soon, the lawyer informed me of a court date. Mediation failed, so it was going straight to trial. In court, Ethan Blake refused to acknowledge any of my evidence, presenting his own photos to try and turn the tables. He was convinced his photos were real, and mine were fake. However, his photos were quickly authenticated as doctored, while my home surveillance footage proved genuine. Everything Ethan Blake had done with Claire Donovan in the master bedroom was exposed. With ample evidence of his affair, the court ruled he had to walk away with nothing. I thought it was over, but Ethan Blake refused to accept the verdict and insisted on appealing, threatening me in the process. I suggest you rent a place. I'll give you 2 days to leave my house, I warned. To my surprise, Ethan Blake ignored me completely. 2 days later, not only had he not moved out, but he also invited a group of cousins from his hometown to stay. Before I could confront them, they had already found their way to the gallery. As soon as they entered, they started smashing everything without a word. The more we destroy, the bigger the bonus Alexander West will give us later, one of them said. Ethan Blake hadn't shown up himself, probably knew it wasn't safe. If I hadn't seen it on the surveillance cameras, I never would have guessed that these people were sent by Ethan Blake. I immediately called the police and started recording the incident. Then I sent the footage to Alexander West. Alexander West, did you really have Ethan Blake send people to vandalize my gallery? What's the meaning of this? By now, my divorce from Ethan Blake had become public knowledge. No one wanted to get involved with him. Panicking, Alexander West called me to explain, insisting he had long lost contact with Ethan Blake, and that those people weren't sent by him. He promised to cover the losses himself and to confront Ethan Blake about it. I trusted that Alexander West, being a savvy businessman, would make Ethan Blake pay. The next time I saw Ethan Blake was through a video Alexander West sent me. In it, Ethan Blake was lying on the floor, motionless, covered in blood. If it weren't for the faint sound of his breathing, I might have thought he was dead. 15 days had passed since the appeal period, and Ethan Blake still couldn't get out of bed. Even if he could, he had no evidence to prove my alleged affair or force me to surrender everything. After receiving the court ruling, I went home with my cousin to confront my ex-husband. "What are you doing here?" my mother-in-law glared at me. Claire Donovan followed behind, rubbing her stomach. "This is my house. I'll come if I want to," I said, holding up the court's judgment. "You've received this, right? Today, I'm here to help you move out." Ethan Blake staggered out of the house, looking exhausted and pathetic. His tone was almost pleading. "Ava, do you really have to be this ruthless? After life teaches a personal lesson, they tend to learn fast. Compared to you, this is nothing," I said lightly. Ethan Blake softened slightly. "I don't blame you for installing cameras at home. But the situation with Claire Donovan really a misunderstanding. The photos with Alexander West, Claire Donovan gave them to me, trying to make us misunderstand each other." I glanced at Claire Donovan. She froze in shock, never expecting the man she loved to sell her out so blatantly. "Ethan Blake, she started. "I'm pregnant with your child," she screamed hysterically, eyes wide with disbelief. "That's not necessarily true," I interrupted. "I didn't just install cameras in the master bedroom." Panic instantly flitted across Claire Donovan's and my father-in-law's eyes. "What do you mean? Explain." Ethan Blake shouted at her. "You leave my house first, and then I'll explain," I said. "Don't listen to her, son, she's lying," my father-in-law shouted, trying to rush forward. My cousin was right there. I wasn't about to let him interfere. Ethan Blake, scowling, commanded them to pack. None dared to argue further. Compared to the house, Ethan Blake valued his pride even more. The house can be abandoned, but if someone dared to humiliate him, he would never tolerate it. I personally oversaw the Blake family packing. Every large item was purchased by men one would leave with them. I retrieved all the bags I had bought for my mother-in-law, and even found several luxury handbags in Claire Donovan's room. Ethan Blake had been generous to her, but all of it had been purchased with marital funds. I confiscated it all. Once the family had left, I quickly changed the locks. "You can talk now, right?" Ethan Blake messaged me. I sent him the surveillance video from Claire Donovan's room that night, just one day's footage, but it was enough to drive him insane. Alexander West compensated me for the gallery damages, and I poured all my energy into the renovation. Days passed, busy yet fulfilling. Just before the gallery's grand opening, news came that Ethan Blake had taken Claire Donovan to the hospital for an amniocentesis. The result confirmed that the child in her womb was indeed his. For the sake of the baby, Ethan Blake no longer laid a hand on Claire Donovan, but he did turn his fist toward his father. Had his mother not intervened, it might have ended in bloodshed. Ethan Blake sent his battered, lustful father back to his hometown, leaving his mother behind. The three of them rented a place, with his mother taking care of the pregnant Claire Donovan. Clearly he did care about the child. Since that was the case, I decided to help him. I packaged all the photos and videos of Claire Donovan, Alexander West, and anonymously sent them to Alexander West's wife, even including their address. The next time I saw them, it was on the front page of the social news. Claire Donovan had been beaten by Alexander West's wife, suffered a miscarriage, and was barely clinging to life in the hospital. Seeing that the baby was gone, Ethan Blake refused to care for her anymore, leaving her to fend for herself in the hospital. Then, shamelessly, he turned to me, begging for reconciliation. Once again, I filed a lawsuit against Ethan Blake, this time for transferring company assets. It wasn't that I hadn't wanted to act sooner, but one thing at a time. This time, the evidence was irrefutable. Ethan Blake had no choice, he lost his temper and confessed in court on the spot. I didn't concern myself with these matters anymore. The opening of my art gallery was approaching, and for its first exhibition, I decided to hold a solo show for myself. After everything I had been through, I had gained a new perspective. I wanted to express this rebirth through my brushstrokes. The exhibition went smoothly. Once it ended, I went to the prison to see Ethan Blake. He had shaved his head, and upon seeing me, his agitation was clear. "What are you doing here?" he shouted. If it weren't for the glass barrier between us, he might have tried to attack me. "I came to see you," I said calmly, picking up the microphone. I then played the video on my phone, the footage of the night. I had switched the wind directly, showing it to him. Ethan Blake's eyes widened instantly. You knew everything? You set the trap to hurt me." "I never harmed you, so why did you do this to me?" I asked, my voice steady. He had only escaped unscathed this once. I had never intended to harm anyone, I was simply returning to them everything they had done to me. As I walked away, Ethan Blake completely lost it. In my previous life, I was betrayed by my father's illegitimate daughter and kicked out of the house. The next moment, she appeared before me, arm in arm with my boyfriend, Matthew Scott. Grace Miller looked at my disheveled state and smiled smugly. I never thought the once envied Sophia Young of the Harris family would end up like this. "Oh wait," she added, covering her mouth in mock surprise, "I almost forgot you're not even your father's real daughter." "You're lying, that paternity test was fake," I shouted. "Fake or real, what difference does it make?" she said, smiling coldly. "My dear Sophia Young of the Harris family, what everyone believes is the truth." She patted my face condescendingly and signaled to her bodyguards. Despite my struggles, they dragged me to the front gate and threw me out like trash. That night, amidst the howling wind and pouring rain, I walked the streets in despair and met with a car accident that killed me instantly. But when I opened my eyes again, I had been reborn back in my freshman year. Everything had yet to unfold, and I swore that this time, Grace Miller and Matthew Scott would pay a heavy price. "Come on, Sophia, this is your sister, Grace," my father cheerfully introduced the girl sitting on the sofa. I offered a perfectly polite smile and extended my right hand. "Hi Grace, I'm Sophia Young. Dad has mentioned you a lot these past few days. I didn't expect to meet you so soon." Grace Miller, clearly unprepared for this reaction, froze for a few seconds before extending her left hand in return. As our hands met, neither of us showed any warmth in our eyes. "Seeing you to get along so well puts my mind at ease. Sophia always said she wanted a brother or sister, so I guess her wish is finally fulfilled." My father said with a laugh. I nodded politely, playing the obedient, well-behaved daughter. Grace Miller, however, looked at me with suspicion. That evening, my childhood friend invited me to a bar. Adam Brooks always loved spending his nights in such decadent places, and this time, I happily agreed. Having lived so constrained in my previous life, I wanted to enjoy myself this time, to explore a side of life I had never dared. Inside the bar, neon lights flickering, Adam Brooks plopped a low-alcohol drink in front of me. "Well, look who it is, Sophia Young. What's with the early appearance today, the sun rising in the east or what?" I took the glass. "Maybe you should read more books, you illiterate. The sun rises in the east, obviously." Adam Brooks patted his head, chuckling sheepishly. "Sorry, I had a bit too much to drink." 10 minutes later, everyone started playing a game. Unluckily for me, I drew Truth or Dare and was dared to kiss the fifth person to my left. I read the words expressionlessly, and the entire room erupted. Sophia Young, the obedient girl? At a bar playing this game? I don't think she'll accept it. I looked helplessly at Adam Brooks, who shrugged. "Want to play, Miss Sophia? It's okay if you don't." The people around me were all wealthy heirs. I counted to the fifth person on my left and, seeing he was quite handsome, I nodded. The crowd went wild again. I walked over. Hi, may I kiss you? He looked a stranger, yet strikingly handsome. The dim lights highlighted his sharp features. I suddenly felt this night was the best decision I'd ever made. He stared at me silently for a minute, tousled hair falling over his deep-set eyes, wearing a limited edition gray hoodie, fingers tapping the glass in front of him, and finally nodded. I had intended to just kiss his cheek, but looking at his good looks, I whispered shyly, "Thanks, sorry for the intrusion," and leaned closer, tilting his head and kissing him. The entire room erupted. Wow, Chris Anderson's first kiss. Impressive. Looks almost like a forceful kiss. Sophia Young really is full of surprises. It was over quickly. I let go and said, "Sorry for bothering you," then returned to my seat. Adam Brooks grinned. "I knew you've been pretending all along." I raised my glass to hide my blush. I'm just a bit tipsy." "I'm just a bit tipsy," Adam Brooks mockingly repeated, and I punched him lightly. The next morning, I glanced at the calendar. Today was the day Grace Miller had arranged for Matthew Scott to approach me. Seeing a message from Grace on my phone, I let out a cold smile. "Sister, shall we have lunch at the school cafeteria today? I just arrived and don't know where to go for food yet." In my previous life, I didn't want to take her to lunch. I was repulsed the moment I saw her. But my father always demanded that I take care of Grace Miller. For years, I had been the obedient daughter, always listening, thinking that if I did so, he might give me a little affection since my mother had passed away early. That, I now realized, was the beginning of my misfortune. This time, Reborn, I swore I would rewrite every story. "Grace Miller, you're so good at setting traps, aren't you? This time, I'll play along and enjoy it thoroughly." At noon, I sat with Grace Miller on the first floor of the school cafeteria. She chattered away endlessly, just like before, expertly playing the role of the innocent, scheming girl. Soon, she bought a cup of iced red bean drink. Passing by me, she accidentally spilled it all over my dress. Jack Thomas appeared promptly, handing me a spare jacket. "I'm sorry, sister. I didn't mean it. I didn't see the spill on the floor. I'm really sorry." I looked at the large stain spreading across my white dress and waved my hand. "It's okay." "What should we do, sister?" Grace Miller asked helplessly. "What else can I do? Just die already," I thought bitterly. "Here, I have a jacket you can use to cover it up." Jack Thomas, our gentle, sunny, and handsome male lead, appeared just in time. My inner thoughts, "Finally, you showed up." "Thank you, classmate," Grace said, directing her gratitude toward him. "No problem, just a small favor," he replied. I watched their clumsy little act unfold, inwardly furious at my past self for being blind enough not to see through these two wolves in sheep's clothing. Damn them, I cursed silently. "Thank you, classmate," I said, taking the jacket Jack handed me. Unlike the white shirt from last life, it was a navy blue one. I looked up and gave him a grateful smile. That evening, I went home and reviewed all that had happened in my previous life. Taking advantage of this opportunity, I managed to get Jack Thomas's WeChat. 2 months later, at the school gala, Grace Miller engineered a public humiliation. Later, at a family gathering, she sabotaged my participation. A few months after that, she presented a paternity test in front of everyone. Looking back now, it wasn't that she was particularly clever, it was that I had been stupid. She had used Jack Thomas to distract me, creating me innocent, conflict-free obedient little girl image in front of my father. The more I thought about it, the angrier I got. Lying on my bed, I replayed my revenge plan in my mind. I glanced at Jack Thomas's blue shirt on the desk, grew even more furious, and tossed it into the trash. Not satisfied, I pulled it out again and threw it out the window. Well, it landed in our garden outside, so no laws were broken. 3 days later, I apologized to Jack. "I forgot to bring it. Can I give it to you next time?" "No worries, it's not important," he said calmly. That guy even went out of his way to coincidentally run into me outside my classroom. Maybe because I hadn't been messaging him lately, he was clearly flustered. I gave him a cold glance as he scratched his head and awkwardly asked, "Do you have time later? Want to grab a bite together?" Jack Thomas was the kind of guy every girl would like, gentle, principled, and considerate. Damn it, I want to punch him. Sorry, I don't have time. Maybe another chance, I said. Okay, sure, he replied. As the sunset spread across the distant sky, I walked out of the music store with my bass on my back. I paused for a moment, staring at the crimson clouds. Passing a convenience store, I bought some Odin and a beer, then returned to school. The Moral Education building had an elevator, so I went straight to the rooftop. The view was spectacular. I could even see the sparkling coastline far off in Xinjiang. I placed the bass of pride on the ground and sat on the steps, enjoying the view while eating my Odin. That's when Chris Anderson approached. I looked up at him for a few seconds before recognizing him. A gentle breeze passed between us, and I scooted over, patting the step beside me to indicate he could sit. He sat down, and I handed him the extra can of beer. He took it, popped it open with one hand. I had to admit, he looked effortlessly cool. So there we were, two people enjoying the sunset. I didn't ask why he was here, and he didn't ask why I hadn't gone home after school. We simply sat there, drinking beer in silence, watching the sun slowly sink. The indigo clouds stretched across the horizon like a delicate veil. I finished my beer, feeling great, and picked up my bass. "What do you want to hear?" I asked. "Lonely Hero," Chris replied. I rolled my eyes and played Lonely Hero for him, not out of kindness, but because I had practiced it. When I finished, he clapped along perfectly in rhythm. "Show me some more," he said. I began singing. I rush into the forest is thick and endless. I can't find his trace, only the trees swaying in the wind. I rush into the forest, I can't see him, only the distant bell of Nanping. It was quiet around us, a secluded corner away from the city's noise. Only my voice filled the air, my favorite song. The evening bell of Nanping drifts with the wind, seeming to strike deep in my heart, seeming to wake my dreams of longing. It wakes my dreams of longing. But what use is longing? I walk out of the dense forest and see the sunset again. The sun stretches our shadows behind us, casting a golden glow on us. I paused midstream, looking at him. Our eyes met, and I realized Chris Anderson was even more handsome than he appeared at the bar, like a male lead who had stepped right out of a novel. "You sing beautifully." "And the playing?" he asked. "Also great." Sunset, rooftop, beer, bass, having someone quietly listen to me sing. For me, life only needed a few moments like this to feel complete. "I'm glad I met you here." "Me too," he said. Later, we parted ways at the school gate under the newly lit neon lights. In my previous life, I had also played this song for Jack Thomas on my bass. He had taken a call halfway through and left in a hurry, leaving me alone. Some scars, even after healing, still throb when touched. I carried a large bouquet of jasmine flowers to the cemetery. I placed the flowers in front of the tombstone, along with my mother's favorite dessert. Kneeling down, I gently wiped the gravestone, my fingers brushing over the sweet smile in her photo. "Mom, I'm here to see you. I miss you so much. Don't worry about me, I've grown a lot. I'm not the same Sophia Young I used to be," I said with a smile, though tears had already begun to well up in my eyes. "It's been 6 years. I remember you sending me off to school, the times we played together. It all feels like yesterday. Mom, I've sorted through the things you left behind, and I've finally understood the clues." I stayed until the sun began to set. As I started descending the mountain, I heard noises coming from a small wooden cabin nearby. The cemetery was built into the hillside, expensive and rarely visited. I cautiously approached the cabin, looked around, and saw no one. Summoning my courage, I pushed open the slightly ajar door and found Chris Anderson tied up. Chris Anderson's hands were bound behind the chair, his feet restrained, and black tape covered his mouth. I quickly closed the door behind me and rushed to untie him. The whole process had to be fast. This was a kidnapping, after all. If we weren't careful, both of us could die, and my revenge would remain unfinished. My hand shook as I untied the ropes. Chris's mouth tape came off, and the first words he spoke were, "Sophia Young, don't panic." I glared at him but continued fumbling with the ropes on his feet. No sooner had I finished than we heard footsteps outside the door. We exchanged a look, silently thinking, we're done for. In a split second, I grabbed Chris and we quickly hid behind the door. I handed him a wooden stick. Chris took his position, holding the stick with both hands. As the door opened, he seized the moment and swung it forcefully at the man's head. Time seemed to freeze. In my mind I silently prayed he would knock the man out, otherwise, we were both done for. With all his strength, Chris hit perfectly. The man collapsed instantly. Overwhelmed by the tension and the unfamiliar situation, I felt like I was splitting in half, my soul floating above while my legs couldn't move. Chris grabbed me and pulled me out. I knew this mountain well and quickly led us down a secret path to the foot. At the cemetery gate waited my red convertible Ferrari. Yes, I've always loved being a little flashy. Only after driving for several minutes did we finally relax. I drove with one hand while keeping an eye on the rearview mirror, wary of any pursuers. That scared me to death, I said, patting my chest with my free hand. Seriously, who in Jingjiang would dare kidnap Chris Anderson? And why was I even curious enough to check it out myself? Almost lost my life. Chris Anderson, on the other hand, was calm. Once in the car, he immediately wanted to call someone to confirm his safety, insisting no further negotiation was needed. They were pushed into a corner and acted rashly. "Thank you, Sophia Young. As repayment, I can grant you one wish." "Wow, how are you like Aladdin's lamp? Can't I have two?" "Name it," he said, turning to me with a small smile. The neon lights along the road reflected in his eyes, making them shine vividly. "I want 100 million, I said, left hand on the wheel, right hand holding up a single finger. "Nope," Chris refused flatly. "Rich people are stingy." "Don't insult yourself," he replied. Wait, I've got an idea." A light bulb went off in my head. "You help me seduce a certain woman." Chris just stared at me, silent. "What's wrong?" "No 100 million, fine, but I can't let saving your life be for nothing. I'm usually kind, but this is the first time I risked my life for someone. You saw how dangerous it was. If I weren't smart, Chris, you wouldn't even be talking to me now. That's too extreme. Come on, just give me the 100 million instead. How hard is it to make a little sacrifice? Your life is worth more than 100 million anyway. Are you studded with diamonds or something? You're really annoying, Sophia Young. How can you talk to your savior like that?" "A little gratitude goes a long way," I wagged my head, teasing him. When my red Ferrari pulled into the Anderson family mansion, the entire estate was brightly lit. Every member of the Anderson family, old and young, stood at the gates to welcome me. I couldn't refuse, so I accepted gracefully. Chris Anderson's mother held my hand, tears in her eyes. It even offered me shares in the Anderson group. I basked in my little heroic fantasy, until I returned home and slept for 4 hours. It wasn't until I got up in the middle of the night that I realized what I had actually declined. At 2 in the morning, sitting on the toilet, contemplating life, I came to a sad conclusion: even reborn, some things were still pointless. News of my rescue of Chris Anderson quickly spread among Jingjiang's wealthy circles. Grace Miller, however, remained completely oblivious. Her status as an illegitimate daughter barred her from this world, no matter how much she wanted to join. Chris Anderson actually followed my lead and proactively added Grace Miller on WeChat. Grace was over the moon. She heard from others that her 2 little minions had already started calling her Madam of the Anderson family. I relayed this news to Adam Brooks, and the two of them laughed like maniacs in the bar. 2 months later came the school gala. During these 2 months I had been in near daily contact with Jack Thomas, giving him the illusion that I like him, a repeat of last life, like playing a scripted game of pretend. The only difference was that sometimes he would look serious and tell me to stay away from Grace Miller. I didn't care, assuming it was just a change in the script after some secret discussion between them. After all, I wasn't going to believe anything that hypocritical dog said. The evening of the gala arrived quickly. I had hidden a small camera in a corner of my room, and sure enough, half an hour before the event started, I received footage of Grace Miller sneaking in and dumping an entire bottle of ink on my dress. Adam Brooks, watching the video, kicked over a nearby chair in anger, then immediately picked it back up, worry written all over his face. "Babe, what are you going to do now?" he asked. "It's fine," I said calmly, setting down the camera and pulling a large bag from behind me. "I have a backup gown." Adam's excitement was palpable. He wrapped me in a hug. "Wow, Sophia Young, you're brilliant. You're my goddess." I laughed softly as he held me. The real fun was just beginning. 20 minutes before the gala started, I cornered Grace Miller with Adam Brooks. When she saw me in my gown, panic flashed in her eyes, but she quickly masked it with a forced smile. "Sister, what a coincidence," she said. I smiled at her, stepped closer, and grabbed her chin, tilting her face up. My eyes were full of contempt. "Grace Miller, you only know these petty tricks," I said. I let go of her, and she staggered back a few steps before regaining her footing, her eyes red as she said, "I don't know what you mean, sister. I really don't understand what's happening." I gestured behind me, and Adam Brooks handed me the gown that had been ruined. Without hesitation, I threw it at Grace Miller. She didn't react in time, and the dress hit her exposed shoulder, smudging ink across her skin. After that, Adam Brooks and I walked away, ignoring Grace Miller's shouts behind us. As the gala began, I set down my glass of red wine and saw Grace rushing in. The ink on her shoulder had been cleaned up, and she shot me a triumphant smile. I returned a small smile, but in the next second, a video appeared on the large screen at the front of the hall. It showed a girl sneakily pouring an entire bottle of ink on a white gown. Grace Miller froze in shock. Everyone recognized the girl in the video, and the gala came to an immediate halt. People whispered among themselves a few meters away from her. "Man, this video is fake, it's definitely fake," Grace tried to explain, but everyone clearly avoided her. Was that the end? Of course not. I shot a look at Chris Anderson in the distance. He rolled his eyes dramatically, set down his glass, and walked toward Grace Miller. He stopped beside her, and she looked at him like he was her savior. Chris spoke, "It's okay. I believe you. This video must be someone framing you." His tone was expressionless, as if reading lines from a script. If I were a director, I'd be annoyed at this perfunctory performance. But to Grace, these words sounded like heavenly music. She nodded excitedly. "Thank you," she said, reaching for his hand, but he sidestepped. "I'll see you out," he said. "Okay." After they left, the murmurs about the two of them continued. "Wait, Chris likes Grace Miller? Who is that girl?" "Chris Anderson has a girlfriend." "Since when?" Even Chris's friends were stunned. Tyler Bennett, who was closest to him, shook his head, insisting he'd rather believe Chris was gay than believe he had any connection with that girl. I shook my head, said goodbye to Adam Brooks, and walked off, lifting my gown as I went. The gala was on the second floor, and I descended the spiral staircase in my black dress. My silver heels clicked sharply on the steps, echoing through the quiet hall. 2 or 3 steps from the bottom, I looked up and saw Chris Anderson waiting at the foot of the stairs. He seemed to be expecting someone. I figured Grace Miller must have been sent away with some excuse. Given the Anderson family status, Chris would never deign to associate with someone like her. I smiled to myself. "Are you waiting for someone?" I asked. "Yes," he said simply. "Waiting for you." He wore a black suit, hands in his pockets, standing tall and radiating the youthful confidence and energy of a young man in his prime. He extended his right hand toward me, looking every bit the gentleman. I stepped down a level on the stairs and placed my hand in his. He held it carefully as we descended, and then, still very polite, he asked if I would like to dance with him. Coincidentally, the music from upstairs started playing at that very moment. I smiled and nodded, feeling my excitement disrupted earlier by Grace Miller's return. We danced in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows, and as light snow began to fall outside, the world beyond the glass turned a soft, pure white, contrasting beautifully with the warmth inside. When the dance ended, I leaned against the window, watching the snow, and drew a rose on the fogged-up glass with my finger for him. Next to it, I sketched a little turtle and wrote "SNY" on its shell. Chris Anderson chuckled and gently tapped my head. The snow fell heavier outside, but the room felt like spring. I gazed past his bare shoulder at the snowy scene, and he kissed me. The view outside took on a dreamlike quality, and I realized it all started spiraling out of control the moment I kissed him first. Sometimes, when life gets stressful, finding a handsome guy to vent on isn't such a crime. From the start, I had sensed something off about Jack Thomas. Compared to last life, many things were different, and after thinking it through, only one possibility made sense. I confronted him directly. "You were reborn too, weren't you?" Jack Thomas froze for a few seconds, then nodded. "Sophia Young, you too." I smiled and stepped closer. "So, Jack Thomas, after I died, you didn't have a happy life with Grace Miller, did you?" He took a few steps back, glancing elsewhere. "No, I didn't know you'd have an accident. I went looking for you, but... well, then I should thank you for that. You went out searching for me." "Sophia Young, let me explain." "Fine, go ahead." Jack Thomas exhaled. "I have nothing to do with Grace Miller. I regret it truly, I regret it so much. She threatened me, wanted to make it up to you, but Sophia Young, believe me, my feelings for you are real. I love you genuinely. I don't know how to express it, and I know you won't believe me." Curiosity struck me. "How did you die?" He paused for a second. "Car accident." "Serves you right," I said, smiling brightly. "Jack Thomas, I honestly have no idea what all that was supposed to mean, but let me warn you, if you tell a single soul about this, I'll make sure you regret it. And stay away from me from now on." I turned to leave, but he grabbed my arm. "I know you won't believe anything I say, but Sophia Young, I really do love you." "Oh, get lost." But he still held my arm, and I shook him off, looking at him. The boy before me was familiar yet strange. "Jack Thomas, you think your love can erase the harm you've done to me?" "No. I am not some selfless saint. Anyone who designs schemes against me, anyone who betrays me, remember it forever, and I repay tenfold. Just saying sorry, I love you doesn't earn my forgiveness. You better start behaving from today, or after Grace Miller, who knows what kind of accident might happen to you next." I waved at him with a smile. "Goodbye." That evening, at the Chen Group's gala, I picked up a glass of wine, but Chris Anderson appeared from nowhere and blocked my hand. "You can't drink that," he said. I understood immediately. Looking around, I realized Grace Miller had no way of sneaking in here, she must still be outside the hotel. "Grace Miller?" Chris nodded. "What did she put in it?" "A love potion," I said with a cold laugh. Late at night, lying in bed, I scrolled through Chris Anderson's phone, checking the messages Grace Miller had sent him. There were many, but Chris hadn't replied to a single one. He even set the chat to Do Not Disturb. He lay on top of me, lowly panting, displeased at my distraction. He leaned in to kiss me, but I dodged, which annoyed him. He bit my neck lightly to steady his breath. I kept his face. "Are you a dog, Chris Anderson?" His peach blossom eyes glimmered with a hazy light, tiny beads of sweat on his temples. I wiped them away, and he mischievously took my hand in his mouth, licking clumsily as he mumbled, "Why yes, yours." I finally understood why so many college girls adored him. Chris Anderson was unbearably sexy in bed, full of raw tension, yet still carried an innocent, endearing charm. Afterward, he held me close, and listening to his steady breathing, I thought, once my revenge is over and everything settles, maybe I could consider dating Chris Anderson. The next morning, I got dressed while Chris lay shirtless beside me, rubbing his eyes and mumbling, "Why are you leaving so early?" "Because I have an ADA. Class," I said, patting his face. "Bye-bye." "Sophia Young," he grabbed my arm, tilting his head to look at me. "When can we go public?" I winked and ruffled his hair with my other hand. "Maybe in a little while." "In a little while?" You said that last month. Did you ever think, or am I just imagining things? Go ahead, leave. He let go, turned over, and buried himself in the blanket, cocooned like a giant snowball. I sighed, went over, and pulled the cover down. Chris Anderson. He opened his eyes, looking pitiful. I wiped a tear from the corner of his eye. Don't worry, I'm serious. I just have other things to deal with right now. Once everything's settled, I promise I'll post 365 photos in a year showing off my boyfriend, okay? Chris Anderson blinked, his long, thick eyelashes glistening with moisture. He nodded at me and I smiled, pressing a gentle kiss to his eyes. After leaving Chris Anderson's house, I checked my phone and saw a message, "The person has been found." An address followed. I tucked my phone away and hailed a cab straight to the airport. 3 hours later, I stood in front of a quaint, antique-style courtyard in a neighboring suburb, my heart pounding with anticipation. I rang the doorbell. After a moment, the door opened to reveal an elderly woman dressed plainly, her hair streaked with gray. She froze for a few seconds upon seeing me, then trembling, threw her arms around me, her voice choked with emotion, "My Anne." I hugged her back, whispering, "Natalie White." An hour later, Natalie White was seeing me off at the door. I reminded her to take care of herself and promised to visit again. Turning away, I wiped the tears from the corners of my eyes. I vowed never to cry like that again. Crying is the ultimate display of helplessness. Back at home, I began reaching out to Aunt Mia Carter, one of the few people my mother had left me who I could truly trust. My Anne, you've already found out?" she asked. "Yes, I know the whole story now." "Do you hate him?" "I do. I'll make sure he never recovers from this." "Good. I'll help you." Lately, I had been frequenting bars, which made Adam Brooks think I had broken up. "Hey, girl, who dumped you? Or did something happen with the family finances?" I smiled without answering. If my family had gone bankrupt, I would have been secretly delighted. On the surface, I was drinking, but my eyes kept drifting toward Josh Martin at the next table. He looked clean-cut and handsome, but he had an aspiring model draped over his arm. So this was his type. Over the past few days, I had been trying to get closer to Josh Martin, my father's confidant, Luke Adams' illegitimate son. Luke only had one daughter, and this son had recently been brought from Pingxiang. Luke adored him, giving him the best resources and connections. But it turned out he was greedy and lustful, a complete mess. From my observation over the past few days, I concluded that he was useless for anything serious, but seducing a model, that he could manage. When Josh Martin left his table, I followed. Around the corner outside the bar, he leaned against the wall, lighting a cigarette under the dim glow of the street lamp. He glanced at me as I approached and exhaled smoke in my direction. I took a step back. He smiled, a gentle expression that didn't quite match his words. "What's the matter, Miss Sophia? Have you been following me all these days? Have you taken a liking to me?" I said nothing. He stubbed out his cigarette and moved closer, bending slightly to meet my gaze. "Not supposed to happen. I heard rumors you're with Chris Anderson." He flicked the cigarette into a nearby trash can. "Or maybe there's something Chris can't give you, but I can." I corrected myself. Josh Martin wasn't a complete mess. He might even have been flying above the walls all along. I met his eyes calmly. "Life in Pingxiang wasn't easy, huh?" He pinched my cheek lightly. "Little girl, don't pry so much." I dodged, and he let go. "Give me 3 days." "Why help me?" He smiled, winking. "Because I hate him as much as you do." I started meeting Josh Martin frequently. Our relationship slowly grew warmer, likely because of the many similarities between us. I asked him which city he planned to visit after all this ended. "Travel," he said. "Be a traveler." I teased, "Sounds like you've played too much Genshin Impact." He asked me in return what I thought. I shook my head. "Not with Chris Anderson." I stirred my coffee, resting my chin in my hand. "Hard to say. Come on. That's Chris Anderson. So many girls at school wouldn't even dare dream about him. Handsome, rich, and a great personality, and you're hesitating?" I frowned. "Are you secretly in love with him?" "Nonsense. I'm just envious." He laughed, and so did I, my stomach aching from the humor. But my smile vanished the moment I noticed who was walking toward us. In the end, I left with Chris Anderson, sitting in the passenger seat of his Bentley Continental GT, pressing my hand against the window and staring at Josh Martin outside. He rolled his eyes at me, clearly unimpressed by my act of silent despair. At the floor-to-ceiling windows back home, I cried, trying to kick him only to have him grab my ankle. I suddenly remembered what Josh had said earlier: great personality, my foot. He never showed jealousy but always retaliated like a storm in the kitchen, in life, in everything. Everything was progressing perfectly, just as I had planned. Harris Group stocks surged, and no one suspected a thing, confidently believing it was the dawn of a new era. But when the executives woke up the next morning, they realized the blessing was actually a storm. The Xinjiang government received an anonymous tip: Harris Group was involved in illegal business operations and investment fraud. The authorities detained the chairman of the group, my father, Ben Harris. When the police came to our house, I was in my room on the second floor. Outside, I could hear Grace Miller and her daughter crying. I drew back the curtains and watched my father being led away in handcuffs, a faint smile curling on my lips. However, things were far from over. Soon after, Luke Adams, the secretary of the Harris Group, was exposed for past sexual misconduct and frequenting shady establishments, with multiple female employees coming forward accusing him of harassment. Following Luke Adams' arrest, several executives of the Harris Group were also taken down. After thorough investigations and evidence collection by the authorities, it was confirmed that the Harris Group had indeed committed crimes such as illegal fundraising and illicit business operations. For a while, the entire city of Xinjiang was abuzz with speculation: who or what had the Harris Group angered to have so many scandals exposed, leading the company teetering on the edge of collapse? It was at this moment that Jing He, a subsidiary of the Anderson Group, began acquiring the Harris Group. The mastermind behind this acquisition plan was none other than Chris Anderson, the heir to the Anderson Group. Half a month later, in front of my villa, Grace Miller and her mother blocked my car. Grace's mother, Hannah Moore, fell to her knees, pleading desperately, "Miss, please help us. Everything has been seized, we have nowhere to turn." "Mom, what are you doing? Get up, this is embarrassing." Grace tried to pull her up. I rolled down my window, seeing clearly the vile expressions on their faces. Smiling, I lowered my sunglasses, letting my eyes meet theirs. "Aunt Hannah, how exactly do you want me to help you?" Hannah Moore, as if seeing a savior, reached forward, fumbling with my car door. "Your mother owns 46 of the Harris Group, she's a major shareholder. That share was left to you. The Harris Group is being acquired, but you'll get a huge sum of money." "Aunt Hannah, you really do know everything," I said. "But tell me, when you went to the sanatorium to provoke my mother back then, did you ever imagine this day would come?" My casual words struck her like thunder. She froze, panicked, and sank to her knees, muttering to herself, "No, how do you know, how do you know?" Leaning my left arm on the car window, I slowly ran my index finger across my forehead, calmly watching the two of them. "Aunt Hannah, after being someone else's mistress for so many years, you've gotten so used to it that you've forgotten your original place. What goes around comes around. Back then, you stormed into my mother's face, and now look at yourself. Serves you right." Grace Miller and her mother looked at me with fear and anger. I relished the moment, continuing, "Yes, I did get a huge sum of money, but why should I give it to you? Oh, and Aunt Hannah, I've heard some of your creditors are sniffing around for you lately. Good luck with that." With that, I started my Ferrari and drove off, casting one last glance at the villa. I recalled visiting Ben Harris in prison yesterday. He seemed to have aged 10 years overnight, his once vibrant spirit was gone. He even thought I had come to save him. Smiling, I pulled out a voice recorder and pressed record. An electric hiss was followed by a woman's voice. "Ben Harris, how far are you planning to push me?" I don't understand what you're saying, Ella Davis. How did you make promises to my father? After my parents died, you heartlessly swallowed their inheritance. Now, you're using Hannah Moore to pressure me, trying to take the shares in my hand. Dream on. Ella Davis, don't push your luck. I've told you before, only one of us can survive. Make your choice. Ben Harris, aren't you afraid of retribution? Haha. Retribution, there's too much filth in this world. Retribution won't come for me. Ella Davis, you're Navi. The recording stopped there. Through the glass, Ben Harris looked calm. You know everything now. You care about no one. Not my mother, not Hannah Moore, not Grace Miller. You only care about yourself and the Harris Group. But now the Harris Group has gone bankrupt, and you're facing prison. You laughed at my mother for being Navi, for not believing in retribution. Do you believe it now? He looked at me, still with a calm smile. I believe it. As expected of my daughter, you have the ability to destroy an entire company. I smiled back. That's not all. I also know you have another lover. A boy was supposed to be born, but I hear he was miscarried just days ago. Probably scared off by the news of the Harris Group's collapse. Don't go too far, Sophia Young, he glared, tightening his handcuffs. I don't understand what you're saying, he added. I smiled, picked up my bag, and left. As my thoughts settled, I restarted my car and headed for the airport. Everything seemed to have finally fallen into place, and I was about to embark on a journey around the world, taking the opportunity to study abroad. I rolled down the window, letting the warm breeze stir my hair, ready to embrace a true rebirth in a foreign land. But my happiness was short-lived. At the airport entrance, Chris Anderson intercepted me, and brought me to his villa. So you're the one who plotted to kidnap me. Using me, approaching Grace Miller, that was just a ruse. In reality, it was to facilitate the Anderson Group's acquisition of the Harris Group, ensuring the Harris Group would never recover. And you still plan to fly abroad directly, Sophia Young. Every time he spoke, his movements intensified, and I winced in pain, tears glistening in my eyes. I instinctively tried to cling to him, but he dodged, forcing me to cry even harder, silently begging him to go easy on me. But tonight, Chris Anderson exuded an aura of danger, unlike ever before. Normally, when I whimpered in pain, he would indulge me endlessly, but tonight, well, I'd brought this on myself. I had gone too far, picked the wrong person to provoke. Chris Anderson was not someone you could fool casually. All I could do was grit my teeth and swallow my pride. Sobbing, I tried to feign the image of a delicate, scheming woman. I'm sorry, I was going to send you an email to apologize once I got abroad. Heh, why not wait until I'm dead before burning paper to tell me, Sophia Young? Boo-hoo, I really am so sorry. I was wrong. Too late. Afterwards, Chris Anderson carried me to the bathroom and placed me on the marble countertop. His hands rested beside me, his gaze locking with mine. Sophia Young, what do you really think I am to you? A con, something you use and then throw away. His eyes looked hurt, glistening with moisture. And of course they would. Who could accept that the person who once kidnapped them could now be the one so intimately close? I swallowed hard. What could I say? I couldn't very well confess the truth unless my brain had turned to cement. And so began Sophia Young's exclusive performance, which I like to call the Harris Group method. I wrapped myself around him, burying my face in his neck. I'm sorry, Chris Anderson. I was terrified back then. You know, my mother died when I was very young, and I didn't know what to do. When I finally discovered the truth, I was consumed by anger. I used every scheme, every trick, all to avenge her. So whether I used you or let my own ambition run wild, it was all my fault. I can make it up to you. I'm sorry. Chris Anderson sighed, pulling me into his arms. Sensing an opening, I escalated, but my love for you is real. I fell for you later, and I've been hesitating on how to tell you the truth, afraid that you'd hate me. But all this is my own doing. I am sorry. I love you. No second chances, Sophia Young. The next morning, I woke in Chris Anderson's arms. The moment I moved, he stirred, immediately hugging me tighter. My face rested against his chest, inhaling his unmistakable scent. Then his phone rang. He frowned, answered, and placed the phone on speaker between our pillows. Tyler Bennett's excited voice came through. "Chris Anderson, what happened with Sophia Young? Did you find her?" "Found her," Chris said, eyes still closed, voice heavy with morning grogginess. "So what happened? What's the result?" Tyler paused, then exploded, "Don't tell me you forgave her. Are you out of your mind? She kidnapped you, used you, manipulated the Anderson group. You hate being used more than anyone. How can you fall in love with her?" Chris opened his eyes, silenced the speaker, and wrapped one arm tighter around my waist. "Don't worry about it. No one else can know about this." A few minutes later, he hung up and buried his face in my chest. "Tyler Bennett won't spill the beans." Oh, I wasn't particularly bothered anyway. 3 days later, I leaned against the wall as I left Chris Anderson's villa. Before getting into the car, I spun around and slapped him. He caught my hand, massaged my palm, and then planted a kiss. "See you at school tomorrow," he said. I pulled my hand back, glaring at him. Back home, I called Adam Brooks over, then lay on my bed cursing Chris Anderson for an hour. During that time, Adam went to the kitchen and brought me 3 glasses of water. Martin sent me a video of himself vacationing in the Maldives, asking which country I was in during my world tour. I lied, typing back that I was currently in Norway. Jack Thomas left a letter of apology, then, along with his sick mother, permanently left Xinjiang. News arrived that Ben Harris had committed suicide in prison. I wasn't surprised. He was far too prideful to accept such an ending. Later, I opened a bookstore on Chunda Trotterndorf to run it. The store had a cozy atmosphere, with cream-colored curtains on floor-to-ceiling windows, plenty of desks and chairs, and lounge sofas for reading or relaxing while sipping coffee. I would often take my laptop to the second floor on free days, find a quiet corner to write, or order a coffee and lean by the window to read. Sunlight streamed gently onto the pages, illuminating every line of text and shining on me, quietly tucked away in a corner of the world.